4 years ago, we created what we dubbed the G.O.A.T line, greatest of all time. This was a little experiment that we did trying to create the perfect pet snake from which to begin breeding into different color mutations in captivity. So we took two extremely different localities, a Sulawesi, one of the most beautiful but also a notoriously large locality of reticulated python, and a small island race of reticulated pythons called Superdwarf. The goal was to get the characteristics of that Sulawesi into the small size of the Superdwarfs, preferably in the first generation cross. And what we learned is a lesson dating back to the 1700s. This little girl's name is Diva, and she's actually a first generation G.O.A.T reticulated python. As you can see, she's very, very small, just like a Superdwarf, but her color and pattern, maybe not as much like a Sulawesi as we would have hoped. It's kind of like taking different color extremes, let's say red, yellow, and blue, and mixing them together to end up with brown. And that's not really what we want in this case. So how do we take the desired attributes for each and allow them to completely shine through one another? Now, a Sulawesi is known, among other things, for having bright yellow heads, thick, deep, rich blacks, and a ton of contrast as they blend in and camouflage to the jungle floor with that dappled light coming through the canopy. Now, Sulawesi Island has this little tiny island chain of remote islands that has dramatically changed the animals that live there. The contrast is gone, but what they do have is a ton of pattern. That is, more occurrences of each section of pattern that repeats to make a reticulated python what it is, but more of like gray and black colorations, thinner lines, and narrower shaped heads. If you want to learn more about this island chain, the sizes of the animals that live there, or what they look like, check out the little poster we made below that you guys can actually take home. And over the years, one of the things that we learned is that while people track like locality percentages, that's not always what determines the traits when it comes to size. In fact, we see that the mother's body type and size change has really strongly dictated the size outcome of the babies. So just like this, our super dwarfed Sulawesi mama is very close to Superdwarf size, even though her dad was from one of the largest races, localities, species, however you want to define it, of reticulated pythons on the planet. Now again, this is something that I share after having dozens and dozens and dozens of different breedings kind of producing it, although perhaps none quite as extreme as this experiment, with the exception of one. You see, we have an ambassador animal, a giant retic named Karma. She's over 20 feet long and we love her, but we're not really necessarily wanting to use her size genetics in the quest to produce the perfect pet for most people out there. However, a big part of her life story as she lives here at Reach Out Reptiles was to move into this basically tiny house that we keep her in behind me here. And last year, in that giant environment, she was actually given access to a male when she began to produce egg follicles. This was not really an intentional part of this experiment or anything. I just thought it would be safer for her to lay a clutch of fertile eggs than to risk being egg bound by not breeding. So the male that we had access to here at Reach Out Reptiles to breed her to was actually smaller than the size of this female, as you can see in this little video from our Patreon group of them breeding. This seems like a perfect time to shout out and say thank you to our Patreon supporters who allow us to do things that aren't always just for financial business decisions, but rather to share the experience of our lives with our animals with other people in a very educational way, like this video right here. So thank you guys. Now the crazy thing about her babies is that they surpassed the actual eventual size of their father, who is 6 or 7 years old, by the time they were 6 or 7 months old. So while we nailed it on the first try and made a much smaller bloodline of snakes using small females, the even blending of those colors just didn't sit well with me. I wanted to try to bring out the more extreme traits in both localities. I mean, if I was gonna sit down and imagine the coolest snake without any morphs whatsoever that could come from these two bloodlines, it would have the thick, chunky yellow head of a Sulawesi, the really bold black patterns on a bright yellow background of a Sulawesi. But it would probably have twice as much of that awesome pattern stamped out down its length, more like the Kalatoa Karompa female used to produce them, and of course, the small size. So the question is, where do we go from here? And this is where our lesson goes all the way back to the 1700s. Now, we've done a lot of videos about Mendelian genetics. What was that guy's first name?
Gregor Mendel.
Gregor? Okay. Now, we've done a ton of videos about Mendelian genetics, something set up by a guy named Gregor Mendel, that talks about how mutations like albinism can be bred for in captivity, since that's a lot of why we shrink bigger snake bloodlines down, is to bring desirable mutations into smaller size. This is something entirely different. So there's this guy named Thomas Fairchild. He was a botanist, and he was the guy who discovered that plants have male and female counterparts. And he began experimenting with crosses, doing fertilization like we do with many plants today. As a part of this experimentation, he was actually the first one to create an artificial hybrid, which was a flower bred between two parents of different species. You see, where the first generation was a mix, and with the flowers, it was like a red flower and a white flower made a pink flower. The second generation had all kinds of variations. So when two pink flowers were bred together, there were some that were white, some that were red, and then there were 50 shades of pink in between. Selectively breeding for those shades of pink, so to speak, is what we're trying to do with the goat line. So rather than taking this snake as a base right from the beginning and running it into all kinds of cool Superdwarf morphs that we've created, combining the collective works of Mendel and Fairchild and to create as much cool, crazy new snakes the world had never been seen, would basically determine that it would take at least another generation to begin perfecting this bloodline itself. She's so weirdly silver. What we're gonna do is go ahead and pull these eggs from her. Hey, sweetie, come here, mama. We're gonna put you in one of these so you can get a weight. Hello. Oh, you did such a good job. Look at those weird, long, skinny eggs. So I wanna continue this bloodline and see if I can bring out some more of those Sula traits while keeping the size small. Hi, I know I need those though. Hello, thank you. There we go. She's not a very Sula looking snake. She's a super unique looking snake, all empty. You can see some of that Sula pattern and everything though. This one weighs 1,885 grams after her first clutch. That's not bad, less than 2,000 grams. What I'm curious about is the F2 generation. We're trying to shrink down a very specific locality look. But what I'm really excited to see is to hold back some of these babies. My first question I have is, do a lot of the babies look even more like Sulas? Do they all come out looking like this again? Do the influences work the way that the hybridization of different flower bloodlines, lineages, I don't know what you would call that, varieties? Do they work the same? And if they do, that's pretty interesting to me. It's only a couple of eggs, and so hopefully they're okay. But these are gonna be, hi buddy, F2 goat line animals. Whoa, that looks like a Sula. Boy, that really looks a lot different than the F1s, doesn't it? There was originally 7 eggs, and we're down to 3 by the end of incubation. Wow, look at the golden colors on that. Here I've got a really thick black one. This one's got that thick, chonky Sula head and brilliant gold colors. And this one here has a very Sula, like stretched out striped pattern. Looks a lot like the dad, but real silver colors because the Superdwarf used in these is Karompa and Kalatoa. 3 baby goats. That breaks us into the F2 generation.
We had a lot of fun with this project and we can't wait to see where it goes in the future. Please take a second to like the video and subscribe for even more content like this in the future. And tell us in the comments, what kind of retic would you shrink down if you could?